The flashing red and blue lights painted stripes across my mansion's front wall. The HOA president stood on my porch in my silk robes, screaming for the cops to arrest me. In my own home? What she didn't know was that I'd set a digital trap hand today. Her empire was about to collapse. Asterisk, the flashing red and blue lights painted jagged patterns across the front of my mansion. Slicing through the calm evening air like sirens of judgment, I stood motionless at the end of my driveway, suitcase handle gripped tight in my fist. The smell of jet fuel and exhaustion still clinging to me from the airport. I had just returned home after weeks overseas, expecting peace, quiet, and maybe a long shower. Instead, I was greeted by chaos. On the porch, wrapped in one of my silk bathrobes, was Barbara Clean, the president of our HOA, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. Her face was a shade of red-eyed only ever seen on warning labels, and her voice cracked through the air like a fire alarm. "There he is, officer. That's the man who broke into my house. Arrest him." For a few surreal seconds, I didn't move. My own home towered behind her, lights glowing warmly through the glass walls I'd paid a fortune to design, now serving as the backdrop to my public humiliation. 2 police cruisers idled in my driveway, their engines humming while curious neighbors peeked from behind their curtains. I took a slow breath, the kind I usually reserve for high-stakes negotiations, and tried to process what I was seeing. Barbara's hair was tied up in a towel. My towel. My favorite coffee mug sat on the porch railing beside her. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But this wasn't a joke. She was serious. She had called the cops on me for trespassing on my own property. "Sir, step away from the porch," one of the officers barked, hand hovering near his holster. I raised my hand slightly, my phone still in one of them. Calm, steady, exactly as planned. Because what Barbara didn't know, what nobody knew, was that my early return wasn't an accident. I hadn't just shown up unannounced. I'd come back 2 weeks early for one reason: to expose her. And as those sirens wailed and Barbara shrieked about intruders, I couldn't help but smile to myself. She thought this was her victory lap. She had no idea she'd just walked straight into the most perfectly documented trap of her life. Asterisk 6 months earlier. I felt almost perfect. After years of surviving out of hotel rooms and rented apartments, I had finally closed on what I called my sanctuary, a sleek glass and steel mansion perched above a lake, surrounded by towering oaks. The moment I stepped inside, I knew it wasn't just a house. It was proof that every all-nighter, every missed holiday, every deal I'd sweated over as a cybersecurity consultant had been worth it. The place breathed silence, order, control. Exactly what I'd spent a lifetime chasing. The community brochure had promised tranquility, friendly neighbors, and a shared commitment to excellence. I imagined quiet morning coffees, maybe waving politely to retirees trimming hedges. What I didn't imagine was how fast one person could turn peace into paperwork-crapped chaos. Her name was Barbara Clean, president of the Homeowners Association. I met her less than a week after moving in. I was still unpacking servers and sound systems when the doorbell chimed. Standing there was a woman in her late 50s, posture military straight, clutching a clipboard to her chest like it held the 10 Commandments. Her smile was painted on, perfect and brittle. "Welcome to Cypress Lane," she said, eyes flicking past me into the foyer. "I'm the HOA president. Just making sure new residents understand our standards." I thanked her. But her gaze wasn't warm, it was evaluative. Scanning my modern furniture, the minimalist fixtures, the black mailbox I'd chosen to match the home's architecture. Her smile twitched. "About that mailbox," she said sweetly, "I'm afraid it's non-compliant. The approved design is colonial green with brass trim. You'll need to replace yours within 48 hours to avoid a daily fine." I blinked, thinking she had to be joking. The house was futuristic. The idea of bolting a faux colonial mailbox beside it felt like slapping a bonnet on a Tesla. I tried reason. "It's part of the house's aesthetic." She cut me off with a chirpy finality. "Rules are rules, Mr. Franklin. They maintain the community's harmony. Then she scribbled something on her clipboard, handed me a copy, and left with the efficiency of a meter maid issuing her 1,000th ticket. For 2 days, I stared at that mailbox notice, oscillating between irritation and disbelief. In the end, exhaustion won. I replaced it. I told myself it was a minor concession, a one-time sacrifice for the sake of neighborly peace. But the moment the green monstrosity stood by my curb, I realized I'd made my first mistake. It wasn't about mailboxes. It was about control. The following week brought the next notice. My garbage bins had remained visible 43 minutes past collection time. Then another. A warning about a package left on my porch for 3 hours, unsightly clutter. Each envelope carried her signature, a flourish that somehow managed to look both elegant and hostile. The neighborhood that had seemed idyllic now felt like a surveillance grid patrolled by one, a self-appointed dictator. Every stroll outside carried the possibility of another citation. Still, I tried to stay civil. I even nodded at her when she drove by in her perfectly waxed 10-year-old Mercedes. Sunglasses glinting like mirrored shields, she never waved back. Looking back now, that first encounter was the quiet opening move of a much larger game I didn't yet know I was playing. At the time, I thought she was just an overeager bureaucrat, desperate for relevance. I couldn't have imagined that months later. She would be standing on my porch wearing my robe, calling the police to arrest me for breaking into my own house. Asterisk. Learned quickly that Barbara didn't enforce the rules. She weaponized them. Every morning, I dreaded the sound of my mailbox lid clanking shut. It meant another neatly folded violation notice waiting for me. One morning it was a warning about improper hedge height. Next, a fine for leaving my recycling bin visible from the street for 45 minutes after pickup. It didn't matter that the street was empty, or that it was raining. Barbara had seen it, and that was enough. Each letter came on HOA letterhead, signed in her looping cursive, dripping with condescension. Compliance ensures harmony. Your cooperation is appreciated. The words looked polite, but they felt like paper bullets. Soon I realized she had turned the entire neighborhood into her personal army of informants. I'd see curtains twitch whenever I parked slightly crooked or left my lights on after midnight. Neighbors who once smiled now avoided eye contact, as if afraid of being seen fraternizing with a non-compliant resident. One afternoon, as I stood in my driveway, staring at yet another notice, this one about unapproved flora, because of a small Japanese maple-eyed planted die, heard a chuckle from next door, getting the Barbara treatment. Huh. I turned to see Arthur, my next-door neighbor, leaning on his fence. He was in his 70s, a retired engineering professor, with sharp eyes and a calm, weathered voice. He gestured at the notice in my hand. She'd fined me once for excessive balloonage, he said. I blinked. Excessive what? Balloons, he explained with a grin. My granddaughter's birthday party had too many of them. Apparently they disrupted the visual harmony of the street. I couldn't help but laugh. You're kidding. He shook his head. She's been running this HOA for nearly a decade. Thinks she's the mayor of Cypress Lane. Her husband's harmless enough, but Barbara, he lowered his voice. She's jealous. Every time someone moves into one of these new houses, she finds a way to remind them she's still in charge. Arthur's words stuck with me. I started to see the pattern. Barbara wasn't protecting the neighborhood's aesthetics. She was policing her own insecurity. Every fine, every citation, every smug letter was her way of reasserting control. For a while I tried to ignore it. I paid a few of the smaller fines, contested others, and focused on my work. But her harassment wasn't random, it was targeted. She seemed to time her letters for when I was busiest, almost as if she knew when I was traveling or working late. One morning, after a long night debugging client servers, I found her standing in my driveway, snapping photos of my lawn. Morning? Barbara, I said, forcing a smile. Something wrong? Just documenting known compliance, she replied without looking up. Your grass is half an inch over the allowed height. I stared at her speechless. She wasn't even pretending to be neighborly anymore. She was hunting for reasons. That evening I sat on my patio, sipping coffee and staring at the quiet houses around me. Every one of them looked identical, perfect, manicured. It was beautiful, sterile and suffocating. I had worked my entire life to afford peace, and somehow I'd bought myself a war zone ruled by a woman with a clipboard. When the Tokyo contract came through, a major project that would require me overseas for a month, I accepted immediately. Not just for the opportunity, but because I needed distance. I needed a break from Barbara's constant surveillance. I didn't know it then, but my absence would be the spark that turned our cold suburban conflict into an elite war. When the Tokyo contract was finalized, I felt equal parts excitement and relief. It was the biggest cybersecurity project of my career, a 4-week consultation for an international banking firm. But if I'm honest, the professional milestone wasn't what made me smile. It was the thought of leaving Barbara and her petty crusades behind for an entire month. According to the HOA bylaws, homeowners had to inform the board of any absence longer than 2 weeks. That meant Barbara. I remember hesitating as I composed the email. I worded it formally. Almost mechanical. I'll be out of the country from May 1st through June 1st. The property will be secured and monitored during my absence. I hit send and sat back, unaware that those few lines would become her invitation. The night before my flight, I walked through the house one last time, checking every sensor, camera, and system. My home wasn't just secure, it was intelligent. I had built it myself from the ground up. Motion sensors, biometric locks, thermal monitors, IO-assisted surveillance that logged every flicker of light and every ounce of water usage. To me, this wasn't paranoia. It was discipline. My fortress of solitude, protected by code and logic. As I set the system to away mode, the interface blinked confirmation across my screen. Full security engaged. I smiled. If a fly entered through the kitchen window, I'd know. When I arrived in Tokyo, life moved fast. Meetings, presentations, endless neon nights that blurred into one another. For the first time in months, Barbara wasn't on my mind. I woke to the sound of city trains instead of HOA letters hitting metal. I thought I'd finally outrun her orbit. But tranquility doesn't last long for men like me. 2 weeks into the trip, I noticed something odd in my daily automated reports. My home system sends me small summaries: energy usage, temperature changes, power consumption graphs. I love patterns. And one small anomaly can scream louder than an alarm. The thermostat in the master bedroom had been manually adjusted. Not remotely. Not by automation. Manually. From 65 degrees Fahrenheit, the energy saving setting to a cozy 72. A glitch, maybe. Or so I told myself. But 2 days later, another ping. The smart fridge logged a change in inventory items I didn't buy. A gallon of 2% milk. A cheap bottle of Chardonnay. Someone had been inside my home. I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop in that Tokyo hotel. The lights of Shinjuku flickering outside my window. I felt it then, the faint electric edge of realization crawling up my spine. Someone wasn't just visiting. Someone was living in my house, and as the security feed loaded, showing the interior of my own living room, I saw something that made my pulse stop cold. Barbara, sitting on my couch. Sipping from my glass. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The video stream loaded, frame by frame, until the image sharpened into high-definition clarity. There she was, Barbara, clean, HOA president. Ruler of lawn decor and mailbox regulations, sprawled across my Italian leather couch. Wrapped in one of my cashmere throws, a wine glass in her hand. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. I thought maybe there had been an emergency, a burst pipe, a short circuit, something that gave her an excuse to enter. But as I scrubbed through the footage, disbelief curdled into a cold, clean fury. Barbara wasn't inspecting anything. She was living there. The footage showed her husband, Gary, a balding, nervous man I'd seen waving from his driveway once or twice. Flipping through channels on my 85-inch television like it was his own, I watched him kick his shoes off and put his feet on my ottoman, the one my late wife had picked out. My throat tightened. I clicked through camera feeds: kitchen hallway, master bedroom, and with every view, my pulse hammered harder. They had unpacked groceries. They had slept in my bed. They had eaten at my table. They'd moved into my home as if it were a free Airbnb. Then came the part that truly broke me. In my walk-in closet, a space I had barely touched since Eleanor passed 2 years earlier, I saw Barbara. She stood before the mirror, running her fingers across the fabric of my wife's clothes. She lifted one of Eleanor's silk scarves, pressed it against her neck, and smiled. Something inside me went still. That quiet kind of still that comes right before a storm. Every rational part of me wanted to pick up the phone and call the police right then. But the other part, the calculating, strategic side that made me good at my job, whispered something else. Not yet. Barbara was the HOA president. She had the spare emergency key, and by the book, she could spin this into an inspection. If I called from Tokyo, I'd be nothing more than a distant voice trying to prove the impossible. She'd charm the local officers, play the victim, and erase every trace before I could land. No, this wasn't about rage. This was about evidence. So I did what I do best. I began to document. From that night on, my home became my digital battlefield. I created encrypted folders, labeled with forensic precision: video, audio, movement, data logs, subject profiles. I downloaded every second of footage from all 16 cameras. I logged every thermostat adjustment, every fridge scan, every flicker of the smart lights. My security system wasn't just protecting MIT, was recording them. Over the next week, I built a timeline of their trespass. Barbara cooking breakfast in my kitchen, wearing one of my aprons. Gary lounging in my office, scrolling through my computer like he was checking emails. Barbara walking into the master bedroom, talking on speakerphone, bragging about how fabulous the place is. Every move they made was time-stamped, archived, preserved. The digital ghosts of their crime was growing stronger with every hour. I even had logs from the smart toileter, ridiculous luxury I'd installed years ago. It tracked water usage, time, frequency. I cross-referenced that data with kitchen activity and sleep sensors. The picture was perfect, unassailable. But the most damning evidence came from the audio feed I activated in my home office. I'd placed a hidden microphone in that room long ago, connected to my internal server for voice authentication testing. It picked up everything. One evening, Barbara's voice echoed through my laptop speakers. Half smug, half giddy. "Oh, it's wonderful, Marge. The owner's some tech guy off in Asia for a month. I'm just keeping things." Operational laughter. The kind of laughter only arrogance can produce. I sat there, half a world away, staring at the waveform dancing across my screen, and I smiled, but not out of amusement. It was the smile of a man who's been wronged and finally sees his path to justice. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to yell or threaten. I was going to expose her. Barbara thought she'd found a loophole, a free vacation at my expense. What she didn't realize was that she was living inside the most sophisticated surveillance system in the neighborhood, and I was watching, recording, waiting. Asterisk. The following days blurred into a rhythm of obsession. By day, I worked presentations and cybersecurity briefings in Tokyo's glass towers. By night, I became a ghost in my own home, an invisible witness haunting the people who had stolen it. Every time I opened my laptop, I could feel my pulse quicken. My mansion, my sanctuary, was alive on screen. Each camera feed told a story. Barbara baking cookies in my kitchen, using my expensive cookware. Gary shuffling through my office drawers, pretending not to notice the camera blinking in the corner. Their casual entitlement infuriated me more than outright theft ever could. They weren't robbing me. They were replacing me. The audio files were the hardest to listen to. I'd left the microphone in my home office running 24/7. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing, soft, comfortable laughter that echoed through my empty house like ghosts mocking me. Other times I'd catch the sound of Barbara's heels clicking against the floorboards, the subtle thud of cabinets closing, and once, the faint sound of water running in my late wife's bathroom. That one almost broke me. Eleanor had been gone for 2 years, but I still couldn't bring myself to box up her things. Her closet remained untouched, a quiet museum of memories I wasn't ready to dismantle. Watching Barbara waltz into that space, wearing Eleanor's silk robe, draping herself in her scarves as if they were trophies, was more than trespass. It was desecration. For the first time in my life, I felt something darker than anger, a cold, methodical clarity. I knew what I needed to do. The emotional sting became fuel. Every camera angle, every log file, every byte of data became a weapon in my arsenal. I labeled each clip with timestamps, context notes, and legal tags. I built a case that even the most skeptical prosecutor couldn't ignore. Asterisk. One evening, the audio feed rewarded me with pure gold. Barbara's voice, sharp, nasal, soaked in smugness, filled my earbuds. "Gary, relax. He won't come back early. I've seen his itinerary. The man's a creature of habit." Her husband's voice trembled. "Barb, I don't know about this." "What if he does?" "He won't," she snapped. "We'll clean up before the 31st. He'll never even know." Paused the recording, sat back, and let out a slow, steady breath. That was it. The confession. The smoking gun. She wasn't confused or mistaken or temporarily occupying the home. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she planned to get away with it. I labeled the file Exhibit Amensry, legal shorthand for guilty mind. Then I backed it up to 3 encrypted drives. After that, I started building redundancy. Multiple cloud backups, mirrored evidence folders. I wasn't just documenting her. I was preparing for war in my field. We have a saying, if you don't control the narrative, someone else will write it for you. Barbara had spent months writing her version of reality, one petty, fine, and condescending letter at a time. Now it was my turn to write hers with timestamps, data packets, and a very long list of federal statutes. Still, I didn't let my rage consume me. That was the difference between people like Barbara and me. She reacted. I planned. She believed authority was power. I knew information was. When I finally called my lawyer, David Chen, I didn't start with emotion. I started with evidence. I sent him a still frame of Barbara lounging in my living room and a short audio clip of her saying, "He'll never even know." His reply came within the hour. "Call me now." We spoke over a secure line. After listening to the details, David went silent for several seconds. Then he said, with quiet disbelief, "In 20 years, I've never seen arrogance documented this perfectly." From that moment, it wasn't just about getting Barbara out of my house. It was about taking her down completely. David and I started building the plan. The timing, the legal angle, the psychological setup. When I returned, she wouldn't just face a confrontation. She'd face a collapse. And the best part? She'd trigger it herself. I closed my laptop that night, the Tokyo skyline shimmering outside my window like a grid of fireflies. Somewhere in my mansion, Barbara was sleeping soundly, convinced she'd gotten away with it. She had no idea that every breath she took in my house was another piece of evidence sealing her fate. Asterisk. I could have come back on the date I'd announced. I could have called the police from the airport and watched from a distance as the system I built did its job. But David, my lawyer, made a point I couldn't ignore. Confrontation from afar would hand the narrative to Barbara. It would be my word against her performance. If I wanted absolute, irrefragable victory, I needed to be the one who walked through that front door and watched her reaction in real time. I needed witnesses. I needed the theater of it. So we planned for precision. David and I moved like 2 chess players setting up an endgame. He laid out the legal landscape, what constituted criminal trespass in our state, how to ensure chain of custody for digital evidence, which audio clips would carry weight in court, and how to handle potential claims she might make about community caretaking. I translated his legal talk into logistical steps: timestamps, redundant backups, physical proof, no loose ends, no improvisation. We picked a return date carefully. Not the date on my email. Not the date she expected. 2 weeks early, early enough to catch her off guard, late enough that she'd feel secure and overconfident. David insisted I maintain a composed demeanor, no theatrics, no shouting, nothing she could spin into provocation. My role was simple: Arrive calm, demonstrate ownership, and let the evidence do the talking. If she tried to play the victim, she would only dig herself deeper. We synchronized watches and encrypted calendars. David arranged to be within 20 minutes of my house once I landed, to materialize as the legal authority who would turn my digital dossier into an immediate, tangible confrontation. He told me to avoid my usual drivers and routines. Approach on foot. Let the neighborhood see me. Let them witness the moment the masks slipped. Arthur, my neighbor, was quietly briefed to be available as a character witness. He was more than happy to oblige. In the days before I flew, I rehearsed my restraint. It's strange how practice can calm the roiling of the stomach. I pictured the porch, the cameras, Barbara lounging with my robe. I pictured myself walking past her without anger, pulling my thumb across the biometric lock, letting that soft chime puncture the air like a judge's gavel. The anticipation didn't taste like victory, yet it tasted like responsibility. This was not petty revenge. It was a corrective. It was to restore a boundary that had been violated, to make the community see that entitlement had limits. I also prepared for contingencies. What if Barbara called the cops before I reached the sidewalk? David suggested we let her call would only hasten her downfall. What if she tried to destroy evidence? The cameras were redundant and off-site backups would preserve everything. What if neighbors were influenced by her lies? The truth, time-stamped and recorded, would outlast any gossip. On the morning I booked my flight home, I felt a curious calm. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. I wasn't returning to pick a fight, I was returning to put a stop to one. And as my cab pulled away from the Tokyo hotel, I allowed myself a small, private smile. It's one thing to build systems that defend data. It's another to use those systems to protect the home you love. Today, all the code, all the patience, and all the quiet work would have their moment under the hot light of day. Asterisk, the 12-hour flight home from Tokyo felt longer than any journey I'd ever taken. Not because of the distance, but because of the weight of anticipation pressing against my chest. Every passing hour was another step closer to the reckoning I had engineered. David's last message before I boarded was simple. Remember, let her make the first move. Calm wins. When I landed, the morning sun was still low, washing the airport in gold. I didn't call my usual driver. Instead, I hailed an ordinary yellow cab, one that wouldn't attract attention. I asked the driver to drop me off 2 blocks from my neighborhood entrance. As we turned into Cypress Lane, my stomach tightened. There it was, Barbara's modest ranch-style home near the subdivision gate. Her pristine silver Mercedes sat in the driveway. That alone told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't there. I stepped out, the wheels of my suitcase rolling quietly against the pavement. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and sprinklers. Birds chirped, peaceful, deceptively so. Then I saw it, my house, my glass and steel fortress gleaming in the sunlight. And there on the front porch sat Barbara. She was lounging in one of my outdoor chairs, legs crossed, sipping from a crystal glass filled with what looked suspiciously like my whiskey. Draped over her shoulders was Eleanor's silk kimono, my wife's. The sight hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I just stood there watching her in silence. She was completely at ease, flipping through a magazine. Unaware that her world was about to implode, I started walking up the driveway slow, deliberate steps, the kind that drew attention. My phone was recording in my hand as planned. When she finally noticed me, I saw her eyes squint against the sun. Confusion flickered across her face. Then recognition. Then panic. The color drained from her cheeks, her jaw tightening. The wine glass trembled slightly before she caught herself, straightening her back, forcing composure. Her eyes hardened, her fear quickly mutating into arrogance. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice brittle but loud. "This is private property." I stopped at the base of the porch steps, setting my suitcase down with a soft thud. "Hello, Barbara," I said evenly. "It's been a while." Her lips parted. Her face flushed again, this time with anger. "That's impossible," she snapped. "You're not supposed to be back for another 2 weeks?" The unintentional confession slipped out before she could stop it. I raised an eyebrow. Really? You've been keeping track of my schedule? Her eyes darted sideways, searching for a way out. Then, like clockwork, she went on the offensive. You're trespassing, she barked. I'm calling the police. Hunt. Move. I didn't argue. I just let her. She dialed with trembling hands, putting the phone on speaker. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. Yes, Barbara said, her voice now dripping with fake terror. There's a man here, he's trying to break into my house. I'm alone and scared. Please send someone quickly. She looked at me as she spoke, eyes gleaming with vindictive satisfaction. She thought she was brilliant, turning the narrative before it could turn on her. I simply stood there, calm, hands visible, my phone still recording, within minutes. The distant wail of sirens broke the suburban stillness. Neighbors began peeking from windows and porches. Curtains fluttered. The show had begun. Asterisk. 2 police cruisers turned the corner, lights flashing, and pulled into my driveway. One officer was young, nervous energy radiating off him. The other, older, seasoned, eyes sharp and skeptical. They stepped out, hands near their belts, assessing the scene. Barbara pointed at me dramatically. That's him. That's the man who broke in. Arrest him. I raised my hand slightly, keeping my tone low and steady. Officers, I said, there's been a misunderstanding. This is my house. The younger cop took a step forward. Sir, keep your hands where we can see them. ID, please. Of course, I replied, reaching slowly into my jacket. It's in my inner pocket. I handed it to the older officer. He studied it for a moment, then looked at Barbara. Ma'am, he said, the address on this license matches the house behind you. Barbara's face froze, then twisted into disbelief. That means nothing, she shrieked. He could have forged it. I'm the HOA president. I'm responsible for this property while the owner's away. Her voice cracked on the last word. The older officer's expression shifted from patience to suspicion. I glanced at her calmly. Would it help, I said quietly, if I opened the front door? She blinked, confused. What? I walked past her up the 3 steps to the biometric lock and pressed my thumb against the glass panel. A soft chime, a click, and the door unlocked. Silence. The older officer exhaled slowly. The younger one lowered his hand from his holster. Barbara looked like she'd been slapped by reality itself. That's when I said, almost gently, you called the police on the wrong person, Barbara. And at that exact moment, as if scripted, a black sedan pulled to the curb. The door opened. Out stepped David Chin, briefcase in hand. The final act was about to begin. David's timing was surgical. The police turned toward the sleek black sedan just as the engine cut off. He stepped out calmly, buttoning his jacket, a leather briefcase swinging by his side. The man radiated quiet authority, the kind that made everyone instinctively step aside. Good afternoon. Officers, he said, extending a hand toward the older cop. David Chin, legal counsel for Mr. Franklin. The name hit Barbara like a slap. Legal counsel? She sputtered. For him? He's a criminal? David turned his gaze toward her, eyes cool, measured, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Ma'am, my client is the legal owner of this property. You, on the other hand? He glanced at the unlocked front door, appeared to be trespassing. I am not, Barbara stammered. I was performing an inspection. There were reports of a plumbing issue. Ah, David said evenly, opening his briefcase. An inspection that involved sleeping in his bed, drinking his liquor, wearing his late wife's clothing, and hosting dinner parties. The officers' heads turned sharply toward Barbara. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. David reached into his case and pulled out a tablet. We'd like to save everyone some time, he said. Let's start with this. He tapped the screen, the air filled with the unmistakable sound of Barbara's voice. Perfectly clear and crisp from the home's audio system, he won't come back early. I have his itinerary. We'll clean everything before the 31st. He'll never even know we were here. The younger officer's jaw dropped. The older one's expression hardened into something colder, more professional. He turned slowly toward Barbara. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "do you have any explanation for that?" Barbara's face went from red to gray. "That's taken out of context," she blurted, waving her hands. "It's not what it sounds like." The front door creaked open again, cutting her off. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway, pale and sweating, was Gary. His eyes darted from the police to Barbara to me, then down to the ground. "Oh God," he muttered. "Barb, I told you this was a bad idea." Barbara whipped around. "Shut up, Gary." But it was too late. He looked straight at Sergeant Miller, the older cop, and said the words that ended everything. "She made me do it," he said, voice trembling. "She said he wouldn't come back. I didn't want to, I told her." Barbara lunged toward him, wild-eyed. "You coward." "Don't you dare, ma'am," the sergeant barked, stepping forward. "That's enough." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. The neighbors had begun to gather now, Arthur among them, standing on their lawns, pretending to check their mail or water plants, but everyone's eyes were fixed on the unfolding spectacle. David spoke softly, but his words cut like glass. "Officers, as you can see, my client has comprehensive, time-stamped evidence of Mrs. Clean's illegal occupancy, including video, audio, and smart system data, all legally obtained under his own property's surveillance system." Sergeant Miller gave a small nod. "That'll do." He turned to Barbara, his tone turning formal, official. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal trespass and burglary. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the cul-de-sac. Barbara's face contorted, disbelief warring with humiliation. "You can't do this to me. I'm the HOA president. I run this community." Arthur, watching from his lawn, let out a quiet laugh. "Not anymore, you don't," he muttered. The younger officer guided Gary gently toward the porch steps. "You're free to go, sir," he said, "but you might want to get a lawyer." Gary nodded rapidly, eyes wet, mumbling apologies to anyone who would listen. I stood perfectly still, arms crossed as Barbara's tirade melted into pitiful sobs. For months, she had lorded over this neighborhood, believing her power was absolute. And now, in front of the very people she had bullied, she was being led to a squad car in handcuffs. David closed his briefcase, turned to me, and said quietly, "Perfect timing, as always." I nodded. She walked right into it. As the police car door shut behind her, the flashing lights reflected off the glass walls of my house hand. For the first time in months, the colors didn't feel like intrusion. They felt like justice. Arthur crossed the lawn, grinning like a man who'd just seen a fairy tale ending. "You really pulled one over her, didn't you?" he said. I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "She pulled it over herself. I just let the truth do the talking." We stood there watching as the patrol car turned the corner and disappeared. The neighborhood, usually so sterile and quiet, erupted in a low murmur of whispered disbelief. Curtains fluttered shut. Then, for the first time since I'd moved to Cypress Lane, the air felt light again. Barbara had ruled through fear, pettiness, and control. But in the end, all it took was her own arrogance to destroy her. She'd mistaken authority for ownership, and in doing so, she'd handed me every piece I needed to dismantle her throne. I turned to David, exhaling slowly. "One queen down," I said. He smirked, and an entire HOA left to reform. We walked inside. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, a final reminder of her intrusion. But it didn't bother me anymore. Soon, that smell would fade, and with it, every trace of Barbara's reign. Outside, last echoes of the sirens faded into silence. Inside, my home was mine again. Asterisk, asterisk. Barbara's arrest spread through Cypress Lane faster than wildfire. By sundown, everyone knew. The self-proclaimed queen of the HOA had been handcuffed on my porch for trespassing in the very home she claimed to protect. The neighborhood's gossip channels exploded. Screenshots of police cars, blurry photos, and half-whispered rumors became the evening's entertainment. For once, her endless rules and threats were replaced by silence. The following week was a blur of statements, signatures, and satisfaction. David handled everything with surgical precision. We handed over the digital evidence videos, timestamps, voice logs, and data reports so detailed they could have served as a textbook in forensic documentation. There was no wiggle room, no chance for Barbara's theatrics. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, of course. A misunderstanding, he called it. A simple case of poor judgment. But when confronted with the mountain of evidence, her own voice bragging about my itinerary, the footage of her entertaining guests, even the logs from my smart coffee machine showing her morning habits, he fell silent. Eventually, Barbara pled guilty to felony trespass and theft. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, community service, and full restitution. I itemized everything she had consumed, broken, or touched. Every bottle, every meal, every load of laundry, she ran through my machines. The total was obscene. She signed the check without a word. When it arrived, I endorsed it directly over to a local homeless shelter. It feels more fitting this way, I told David. He smiled, understanding. Justice didn't need revenge, it just needed balance. Gary, her husband, was spared from prosecution. His cooperation and his public breakdown on the porch made that easy. He packed up within a week. Arthur told me later that Barbara and Gary sold their home to cover her legal fees. The day they left, a moving truck idled at the neighborhood entrance while Barbara stood by the curb, staring up at the sign that read Cypress Lane Community, a standard of excellence. She didn't look like royalty anymore. She looked like consequence, but my satisfaction didn't end with her punishment. It extended to the HOA itself. The board scrambled to contain the fallout, but the community was done with secrecy. An emergency meeting was called in the clubhouse. Every homeowner showed up. David presented our findings to the board, highlighting years of abuse and negligence under Barbara's reign. Faces went pale as her actions unfolded on the projector screen. Her arrogance, her misuse of authority, her complete disregard for privacy. Then I stood up. Calm, steady, no anger, just truth. This isn't about me, I said. It's about trust. We let one person's ego become our law. That ends today. The vote to dissolve the emergency key by law passed unanimously. Within weeks, the entire HOA board resigned. Arthur was nominated as the new presidential, reluctant, humble, and fair. Life slowly returned to normal. The ugly green mailbox Barbara had forced me to install was replaced with my original black steel one, sleek and defiant against the sun. One evening, I sat on my back patio, the same place Barbara had once thrown her dinner parties, pouring myself a glass of the same single malt she'd stolen. The air was quiet, clean, mine again. I raised the glass slightly toward the horizon and murmured, "Here's to boundaries, and to those who learn them the hard way." The first sip burned warm, not bitter. The house around me was silent, loyal, watching. My fortress had done its job, and for the first time since moving to Cypress Lane, I finally felt at home. Asterisk weeks passed, and the neighborhood that once felt like a silent battlefield began to breathe again. No more warning letters. No more petty fines. No more clipped voices asking, "Have you read the bylaws?" Cypress Lane finally felt human. I'd walk past Arthur's yard some mornings and see him laughing with neighbors. Coffee in hand, clipboard nowhere in sight. The tension that had hung over the street like fog had lifted. People smiled again. Doors stayed open. One night, as I sat on my patio beneath the soft hum of the porch lights, I thought about how everything had unfolded. Barbara's downfall wasn't just about one woman's arrogance. It was about a pattern of disease that infects small power and convinces people its strength. She didn't invade my house because she needed shelter. She did it because she thought she was untouchable. But here's what people like her never understand. Real power doesn't come from control. It comes from restraint. I could have stormed home from Tokyo and started a shouting match. I could have humiliated her on social media or dragged her through a long, bitter lawsuit. Instead, I let patience and evidence do what rage never could in cybersecurity. There's a principle I live by. The system fails not because of a lack of defense, but because of arrogance. Barbara's arrogance was her breach point. She believed rules protected her, but in reality, they trapped her. That lesson applies far beyond neighborhoods and HOA politics. It's about life. It's about the quiet wars we fight with people who mistake kindness for weakness. Bullies, manipulators, narcissists, they thrive on reaction. They feed on chaos. But the moment you stop reacting, the moment you replace emotion with strategy, they lose their power. As I sat there that night, the air cooled against my face. I realized this wasn't just a story about getting my home back. It was a reminder that peace isn't given, it's defended. That dignity doesn't shout at documents. And that sometimes the most devastating revenge is calm truth. Revealed at the right time, I looked at my reflection in the glass door, the faint shimmer of the home I'd built, the life I'd rebuilt, and smiled. Barbara thought she'd found a free vacation. What she actually found was a mirror, because arrogance always believes it's unseen. Until the cameras start rolling, and sometimes the best security system isn't technology at all, it's patience. Asterisk.